Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Entrepreneur Mind Speak. I'm Lauren with Creme de Mint Design, a branding and packaging design agency, and I'm here with my co-host, Natalie.
Hi, I'm Natalie. I'm the founder of Cloud Create, a web development agency here based in Tampa.
And today we are excited to have Saloni Doshi from Eco Enclose. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
We'd love to hear more about your background and what inspired you to start Eco Enclose, and how has your passion for sustainability shaped your company?
Yeah, wow, that's a big, fun question to get started. So I'll start by saying that I didn't actually start Eco Enclose. I think that's like a really interesting and fun, helpful part of the entrepreneurial journey or story. So actually, 9 years ago this month, my husband and I actually acquired Eco Enclose. It was super small. It was a four-person company at the time, and it was started by a woman who started a company called Thirsties, which is a cloth diapers brand. And she's here in Colorado, which is where we are. She started this brand and I think was like, I don't know how to ship these things. I don't want to ship these things in virgin plastic, right? And so she started this journey and then decided like she doesn't want to run a packaging business. And at the time, my husband actually was looking, Kyle, who I run the business with today, was looking to acquire a business. And it happened to be that he was connected with Aaron and was like, this is a great business. I, at the time, was working full time in sustainable agriculture consulting. So I was working, going all around the country, helping municipalities and farms profitably convert from industrial agriculture to organic agriculture and regenerative agriculture. And so I think when we all came together, it was like, wow, this is an intersection of a brand, of a business that sort of checks all of both of our boxes. And so, right, it was a great business opportunity. The market was really exciting. E-commerce was blowing up. The interest in sustainability was blowing up. And I sort of overlaid it with like, not only would I get to work on sustainability, which is something I was already orienting my whole career around, but also I had the opportunity to sell to and work with thousands upon thousands of small brands. And I was doing consulting work, so I loved small businesses. So I always look back and I think, hey, if Kyle had bought a really different business, I probably would not be running it alongside him. But we found Eco Enclose, and it was like the intersection of so many good things for us, and we decided this was like going to become something we did together.
Wow, that is such a cool story.
That's so perfect too. And I think really motivating for people to hear also that sometimes acquiring a business can be even better than having to, do it from the
Yeah,
ground up. It was
yeah,
like the
definitely.
perfect.
Better or
Maybe.
worse, I don't know. It's a different way to do it, right? Which I think is so exciting. We acquired a business, so the good thing is like you didn't have to build the first product from scratch. I think the hard thing is that we already had like there was a lot of expenses already in the business and it wasn't making enough money to cover it. So we sort of acquired like a cash negative business. So great foundation, but a lot of challenges that sort of came, especially like we were early in our stage of starting have family, so having money mattered. So we had another set of challenges that was really fun to work through. But
Can you tell us a little bit about the standards in the industry? Of course, sustainability, it's become a little bit of a button just within the I'm a lot in e-commerce, so you hear that
yeah.
word all the time, but what does that really mean for businesses in general, and what does that mean for you? Because I'm sure that you have certain standards that you adhere to.
Yeah, I love that question. And so I'll really go back to I'd say the first couple years of Eco Enclosed was a little bit of like survival mode, right? Like we took over a business. How do you start building it and growing it and making it sort of self-sustaining financially? And then a couple years into it, one of the things we realized was like, listen, like we can't keep calling ourselves a producers and sellers of sustainable packaging without actually like saying that we know what that means. And so I really took on the task of like diving deep into this concept. Like, what does it mean to us? What does it mean in the world? Because we were also seeing like a landscape of people saying, like, oh, my recyclable box is sustainable. Like, you just realize people were sort of slapping it on their product or packaging without thought. And so that was the beginning of us developing like a pretty rigorous framework that has now stayed with us from day one. And so we have two parts to it. One is we have stepped back and said, what is we know that our packaging, no packaging today, including our own, is truly sustainable, right? It's all currently still net negative to the planet. So then we stepped back and said, what does it look like for packaging to one day be sustainable? And for us, we've created a whole definition around like packaging circularity, which for us means that we want a future in which one day all packaging is largely made out of packaging and becomes packaging again in its next life. So that's sort of the circularity part of it. And that the net inputs that are going into the packaging being produced are regenerative rather than today's net inputs, base inputs, which are extractive. So that's sort of the North Star, a little heady. So then we said, okay, how do you then design packaging around it? So we created a sustainable packaging framework that says like, if our decisions can meet these 10 criteria, we know we're steadily making progress towards our North Vision. And so there's 10, I would not bore you to share all 10, but the top things is like, we really will always emphasize post-consumer waste and high recycled content, because you can't make packaging out of packaging if you're not using waste from packaging as your input. And then we design for ready recyclability. Again, you can't make packaging out of packaging if people can't easily recycle their packaging. We focus on looking for and catalyzing the adoption of the most regenerative novel materials possible. So that's an element. We talk a lot about transparency, and then we also do a lot to overlay an analysis on like carbon footprint, energy consumption, water consumption, recognizing that environmentalism is complex. There's many, many different issues. So we never make a decision without analyzing all of the various issues and how it's impacting them. So those are just a couple examples of the criteria in our sustainable packaging framework. So I can talk at length about it, but I will not keep boring your audience with more and more on that front.
Oh my gosh, that is amazing though. You just got me like excited about that. Like I of course have always loved the idea, but yeah, for me it kind of hung up with like, oh yeah, something that you can throw in your recycling bin, which I'm a little bit like I don't totally trust that all my recycling is actually being recycled, so it never fully came home to me when people or brands said that to me. So I love that you're taking it a step further. And even with that future goal in mind, that one day it brings me back to when I was a kid and the milkman would leave the glass bottles and then you'd use them over and over. I'm like, wow, yeah, if we could come to that point as a large modern society, working towards that is such a huge step. That's amazing.
Yeah, and I will, just to give you a little bit of confidence, it is like definitely true that recyclers are recycling your packaging. So just, I think I like to dispel that myth. What definitely happens is that people do a lot of wish cycling. So they tend to throw into their bin a bunch of things that their recyclers don't accept. And those things, of course, aren't getting recycled. But recyclers are businesses that only work if they can sell like what they receive. And so as long as you're recycling what they can accept, largely that is finding markets and getting sold, and oftentimes getting converted back into recycling. So I do think our recycling infrastructure is a lot stronger than people think, though there are a lot of materials that people think are recyclable that aren't, and then they end up sort of sending it to the MRF and it doesn't get recycled.
Oh my gosh, I'm so glad that you clarified that as well. Because seeing so many I'm a huge documentary fan. You
I know.
see so much of both. But
And
that's
I think
wonderful
it's
to
that
know.
stupid chasing arrows that's ruined everything, right? Because people are putting the chasing arrows on a number 6 plastic. So the public is like, oh, this must be recyclable. It's not recyclable. Your MRF is not accepting it. So they're putting it in the bin and it's getting landfilled. But if you're sort of following the instructions of your recycler, they're likely selling that product successfully.
Oh, that is wonderful to know. That's a great public service announcement for everyone,
Thanks for giving me a chance to say it. I appreciate it.
for sure.
Awesome. And can you tell us a little bit about the seaweed windows that you have?
Yeah, so that goes into that third thing that I was describing, which is like we recognize that the net inputs that go into packaging today are largely extractive, right? We're logging trees to make paper, we're extracting fossil fuels to make plastic, we're mining bauxite to make aluminum. Like all of our current packaging based materials are extractive. And so we always think like, what does it look like in the future to have a world where our packaging is actually produced from materials whose production is net positive for the planet? And so we're sort of always like scanning the landscape to say like, what is what is there? And there are a lot of bio-based plastic alternatives whose production is actually not great, right? Like people have been trying to make plastic out of corn for decades. And our sort of sentiment is like that isn't a great replacement for fossil fuels. It's sort of net destructive to the planet. And so we started really looking at what are the options out there. And we started our partnership with Sway about a year and a half ago. And Sway is a developer of a plastic made out of seaweed. And in our work with them, what we've been really impressed by is the ability that they have a really strong commitment to sourcing seaweed in a way that the seaweed production is regenerative, right? It's restoring the coastal ecosystems. It's creating livelihood for coastal communities. They haven't yet been able to complete an LCA, but like preliminary studies show that it could be carbon sequestering. It could help reverse ocean acidification. So here's like an input whose production is net positive. And so they've been looking for ways to convert it into plastic film. And we started working with them a year ago to turn one of their first films, which is 100% bio-based, into a window that can be put, like if you think about all the paper boxes, you get like pasta boxes that have a window on it. What if we can replace all of the fossil fuel windows with these Sway seaweed windows? So we launched that last year. It's available to any brand that wants it in a couple different sizes. And now we're working with them to bring some of their other films to market, like such as like a Sway poly bag and things like that.
Wow, that is so cool. I'm so excited that you guys have that partnership and that you've taken it where you guys have taken it. It's yeah,
Yeah, I
super
mean, it's still early stages, but it's so exciting. We actually, yeah, we just had a couple really fun brands place orders like last week for Sway seaweed boxes. So I'm just like, it's starting to gain traction. People are starting to use it in the market, and it's, you guys probably have seen about our algae ink. Like I think about 5, 6 years ago, we started partnering with a developer of a black ink whose pigment, instead of being made out of fossil fuels, it's being made out of algae waste cells. And so that journey was similar. Like 6 years ago, only a couple brands used it. We were sort of trying to make it work on our printing equipment. Today, 6, 7 years later, it's now used in Nike apparel and Nike shoes, right? So it's like the journey of innovation is long and just 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But so you see over the period of time, like how much progress can be made. It's really exciting.
And just to see like humans can live symbiotically with the earth, in
Yeah,
these
yeah.
ways that
There's
you
a
would
lot of
never.
options. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
It's so well said.
incredible. And you mentioned the industries that you worked with a little bit as far as food and all this kind of stuff. Can you tell us more about the various industries you're
Yeah,
serving and
yeah, I
who might
probably should have started with that, huh? Yeah, so we largely do shipping packaging, though we do retail, like secondary retail boxes as well as multi-layered pouches. So our focus is on basically any direct-to-consumer brand that wants to ship in ways that sort of represent their values, right? If you want to be proud of how you ship, we want to help you do it. The industries that we service would range. We work with a lot of apparel brands. We work with a lot of outdoor gear brands, like supplements, personal care brands, cosmetics, footwear. So sort of runs the gamut. I would say we almost anybody who ships, we work really successfully with, unless you're shipping sort of furniture or electronics. Those are sort of specialty, those require a specialty like a type of packaging that we don't necessarily specialize in. Our specialty is in like a D2C brand that wants to deliver to their customer and like an unboxing experience that really represents what they stand for as a company.
And then you also mentioned that you do some secondary packaging. Could you talk a little bit more about those brands? And on that, can you also talk about any specific customers that you have helped and maybe some success stories?
Yeah. And when you say helped, you mean like help them elevate from like a less sustainable to a more sustainable
Yes,
brand?
exactly. Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, I mean, we just I love my brand so much. We have the pleasure of working with like 20,000 brands or so. So I just like love them all. I would say, one brand that I love working with is a brand called Sugar Dough. They do like very natural like waxing basically for like hair removal. And what I love about how we worked with them is that what we really had to understand, like we do their secondary, so their retail folding cartons is something that we do for them. And what I loved about our project with them is that they very committed to sustainability. Our founder is really focused on it. And yet she's also needing to run a business. She had a deadline that she had to meet to get sort of placed in Ulta Beauty. She had a very strong desire to achieve an aesthetic sort of look and feel that was going to just like elevate her brand. She obviously had a price point to meet. And that is really our sweet spot of like, you care about sustainability, but you also have a business to run and you have these things that you have to meet. Come to our team and explain to us what your sort of competing, conflicting priorities might be, and how much you need to lean into sustainability or potentially need to make some trade-offs there in order to meet those other needs, and we will help make this all work for you. So that's like a great example, I would say, of like a beauty industry brand that we've sort of helped successfully juggle all those pieces. Another fun story that I love is a company called Armoire, and they are a clothing rental company, clothing rental subscription company based in Seattle, actually. And we have worked with them to create like 100% recycled poly mailer that has a gorgeous branded experience. But about maybe a year and a half ago, we started working with them on a reusable mailer that has like, it's just a really cool mailer that we worked with them to design that sort of doubles almost as like a shoulder bag. So it's like you can get your clothing for the month in this reusable mailer, and at the end of the month you sort of send back the vast majority of what you have, but you might keep one to purchase, but you send it back in that reusable mailer. So it's a super fun experience. And then one of my other favorite brands that we work with is a company called Bedrock Sandals. They make like really minimalistic sandals for hiking and running, and they were the first brand to use algae ink at scale. And they have this gorgeous box that has like just this hand drawn design because one of their founders is an artist. So he hand drew this design. We converted it into like just a great printing plate that's working beautifully. They used algae ink, and now they use algae ink on everything. So like their whole line is like branded in algae ink. And it's just a really like the whole brand speaks to adventurism and personality and identity. And they've just done a beautiful job embodying that. So those are some examples, but I can go on for a long time.
Sometimes people have the idea that they do have to compromise on certain things when it comes to being more eco-friendly as far as functionality and also beauty. So what could you say on that? Are there certain compromises that people should be thinking with that they have to make? Also, of course, the cost would come into that. What are some compromises that businesses might have to think with if they want to incorporate sustainable packaging?
Yeah, it's a great question. And the answer unfortunately is yes, right? Like you do actually have to navigate compromises and conflicts when you're trying to make the most sustainable choices, but also meet other demands of your brand. Again, I'll just like say I think the beauty of Eco and Close, and we just have an incredible customer support and sales teams, is that like we always say internally, like the mantra is progress over perfection. Like we're not here to shove the most perfect packaging solution and be like maniacal about it to every brand we work with. We're here to say like we have a range of offerings and we're going to help match you to the one that works. So just a little tooting of the horn of our sales team because they're so good. But yeah, like a perfect example might be like there's a bunch of different paper boards you can use when you're making your like retail folding carton for your cosmetics or your lotion or something like that. So there is a lot of people out there will use SBS, which is I would say not a good paper board to use. It's almost always it's solid bleach sulfate is what it's called. But it prints really well. It's almost always made with virgin content. We have a version that's made with 100% recycled content that's extremely expensive. So it's just out of reach for people. But that's called SBS. It's super common. It prints really well. It's very affordable. And it's what people use. When we start working with people, we're like, okay, well, if you want to make even a decent migration, maybe let's consider CCNB, which prints really well, but maybe not as well. It has a little bit more of it's craft on the interior. And so we're working with people to say, and the CCNB is 100% recycled with a clay coating on it. So we're working with them to say, let me send you some samples. Is this going to meet your brand aesthetic? If not, here's some others. So we're sort of navigating like budget, thickness that they need, strength that they need. But for that industry, it's a lot of like, can I just wow them on the shelf? And then some brands have like oriented their whole brand on the naturalist look, and they can, if they've done that really well and that's appealing to their customers, they can sort of migrate to even more quote unquote circular or sustainable packaging. So we're sort of like looking at the whole gamut and helping people make decisions alongside them. based on like, is it going to meet their brand aesthetic? Is it going to meet their timeline? Is it going to meet their budget? Things like that. So I don't know if that, hopefully that answers your question.
Oh yeah, that's beautiful because then even a brand that might not have a huge budget to start with, they can start with one of your more basic suggestions, and as they grow with you and go to the more and more sustainable options. So that's
Yeah, that's
wonderful
exactly
that you're
right.
not like a one size fits all.
We're not.
Like,
We do have some very specific parameters of things we won't sell. So like I won't sell an SBS that I can't confirm definitively that it's not sourced from ancient and endangered forest. So like if I'm going to sell an SBS product that's virgin paper, I'm going to do make sure that we're not selling something that ideally is an FSC certified or something else. So our sales team has a really strict, we rank a lot of materials on an A through F scale. And basically, like if something is an F, we won't sell it. But we'll be honest with you as to why. And sometimes it means that we can't work with you, but hopefully it helps educate brands as well.
absolutely. I think this is an area that's very unknown about for people.
Yeah, for sure. Especially in the world of paper, because there's a lot of times a sentiment of like, oh, it's paperboard, it's recyclable, so it's fine. And so a lot of the work that we come in is like, actually, the sourcing of paper is such a big deal. Deforestation is, I would say, just as big of an environmental issue as ocean plastic pollution. And so, like, helping people educate on like the source inputs are so important. Let me help you understand the gamut of options and which ones you really want to stay away from, and which ones really sort of represent the holy grail almost.
And do you work with perishable goods like food?
Yeah, great question. We don't do perishable packaging, though. We have a lot of insights into it. So if anybody would be interested, we can share some more. We do like pouches. So we do food, but largely for dry, like for pantry goods rather than for refrigerated goods.
Right, right. And how do you see the regulatory landscape evolving for sustainable packaging? And how is EcoClose preparing to help businesses navigate
Yeah.
this?
Yeah, I mean it's like it is a minefield right now. And in some ways a really good way. So I think the thing that's on the most people's minds is EPR, so extended producer responsibility, which has been in play in Europe for a decent amount of time and is now becoming very relevant in the US. You've got a handful of states that have passed that legislation, most sort of notably California, because in general, like where California goes, everybody aligns their labeling and their processes to California. But Colorado, Maine, Oregon, there's a bunch of states that have adopted EPR legislation. And so, what EPR is basically doing is, I would say, two things. One is that it is asking or it is requiring brands to join a pro, which is a producer responsibility organization. You have to join it, and then you will pay fees into that pro based on how much packaging you sell to a state. And then those fees are presumably going to go into the investment in waste management and recyclability and composting in that state. So that's like the at its core. It doesn't really, that basic thing doesn't dictate any decisions, but what ends up happening is what they call eco-modulation. So your fee structure would go up or down if you are prioritizing more readily versus less readily recyclable goods or materials. So that would maybe incentivize brands to choose some materials over the other. And in California in particular, and this is happening in other states too, it's also adding a layer of labeling requirement on it. So California's legislation is also creating a lot more, I would say, strictness about how packaging gets labeled, whether or not it's recyclable and what the inputs are into it. But largely around recyclability. So how is that changing the landscape? A little bit of people don't really know yet because it's all sort of in flux. I think that a year from now, we're going to find that um, people will not put end of life labeling on their package without some sort of third party verification of that labeling. And it will likely create a little bit, a big change in the chasing arrows concept. So the chasing arrows concept is really just a resin identification code, right? You see the chasing arrows and you have the numbers 1 through 7. The public believes that that's a recyclability claim, but it's not a recyclability claim. It's just an identification of what kind of plastic polymer went into it. And so I think California's legislation will basically get rid of that or change that. And it's like you can't use the chasing arrows because the public associates it with recycling. You actually can only call something recyclable if it is a material that is readily accepted as recyclable. So I think it's going to do a lot of good. It's going to create a lot of clarity. And I'm also excited for brands to have to invest in the waste management infrastructure of the packaging they're producing. I do also think it's going to potentially, it has some moral hazards and some negative incentives, right? It could create a lot of fear, and people will not label things as being recyclable that truly are, because they're like nervous about putting a recyclability claim on something and getting sued. And then so you might actually see for a period of time a decline in recycling. So I'm sort of cognizant of some of the potential downsides of the legislation, because people will respond with fear and like mitigation of lawsuits versus a commitment to like, let's make sure all of our packaging gets recycled. I think it'll all get ironed out, but it'll be interesting what the next couple of years brings.
Wow, that is super interesting. I'm so glad you dove into that.
If I go driven maybe really far, I could talk about EPR for hours. So
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. Like, I feel like I'm learning so much from you.
Totally.
thanks.
Not to mention
Thanks.
that, like, that really, since I'm not keeping up with the industry myself at all, beyond trying to recycle as much as I personally can, but hearing that is like a really nice kind of bright light in just the subject of waste. Coming from Europe, where recycling is such a big deal, like, you don't have one big recycling thing. You have like
Yep.
four different recycling things, and
Exactly.
depending on what it is. And it was a bit more work, but I really appreciated it because you do really feel like things are going to the right place and becoming
Yeah.
more sustainable. So
Yeah.
even in the United States, it becomes, 10% more over the next couple of years. That would be amazing, even if it
Yeah.
did have to go through some growing pains.
Yeah, we're gonna have some growing pains, but you're right. Like that is essential to like our vision of circularity can only be achieved if we make some of these things happen. I think with the other thing that's sort of questionable, and we'll just sort of see how it plays out, is that California in particular has really focused on plastic reduction as well, which I think is really interesting. But I've alluded to the fact that like the replacement of plastic with paper is has a lot of environmental risks as well. And I worry that some of the legislation has not appropriately considered that, because they haven't, they should be making more requirements. So like, yes, if you want to move from plastic to paper, make sure it's 100% recycled. It's not okay to source, potential paper that poses potential risk to ancient endangered forests. So there's layers upon which we need to build so that we are not inadvertently incentivizing behavior that's actually just as bad for the planet, if not worse.
That's a great point of awareness as well, and definitely something that I hope that the consumer becomes more and more
Yeah,
educated in. Because
agreed.
at the end of the
Agreed.
day, sometimes the government appears to have more. Like they want the perception to be good, but of course the result needs to be really good too.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about the experience for your clients? Like, what are they going to go through to start signing up with you, start working with you?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. A lot of it just depends on, I would say, the size and the complexity of the project that a client, like a brand has. I mean, many of our brands don't just go to our website and they place their order, right? So if you're like a brand that's fairly small and maybe you just are shipping out a couple orders a week and you just need a box or you just need a mailer, you could go to our website and feel really confident, sort of just placing an order. We'll ship it out the next day and you'll get it. So that's sort of a baseline experience. Then many of our, I would say, slightly larger brands will start really digging into custom branding. And again, you can order custom branded, gorgeous packaging from our website, but many of those folks will just reach out to us. You just reach out to hello@ecoenclose. I would say we have an incredible customer success team that will then, answer all your questions, make sure your die line looks great, help you dial in your design so that it prints beautifully, help you just like get the best pricing and functionality. Like if you're like, I'm not sure if I want to choose between this box and this box or this mailer and this mailer, our team can sort of guide you through that decision. And then for the really big brands that we work with, a lot of their packaging is what we call in-house, like inline packaging, which means that it actually gets customized in the manufacturing and converting process. So if you're like Stitch Fix and you're working with us, they want like maybe a custom size and they want custom features on their recycled poly mailer. That's a pretty more in-depth experience with our sales team, where we really understand exactly what you need, and the lead time is longer, but we're sort of customizing from the very beginning. So a lot of it depends on your size, but most people's journey would start by going to our website and or just reaching out to our success team. And I would say in general, you're in incredible hands if you do either of those things. There's so much automation and like everyone's like trying to AI it. And I get it. Like as a business owner, I get the appeal. But like for these companies, like this is their baby. Like they're not gonna wanna like print your you don't wanna print your box if you haven't like talked to a person who you know cares just as much about the success of that print as you do. And so I would say as the industry has moved away from humans, like we've probably moved a little bit more to humans because of how much I feel that way.
I so agree 100%. And I appreciate that for you and for your clients.
Yeah, 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 and it's a lot more fun to like walk into the where or walk into our office every day and like be greeted by humans. So it's also good for me as a person.
Awesome.
Can you also talk to us about the Eco Ally experience that I saw on your
Oh
website?
yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of it was almost maybe described by what I just said, which is like, so, but I'll maybe step back. So we really we've helped ourselves more than anything, like define what we want it to mean for a brand to work with us. And we've done that through this visual of the Eco Ally experience. And so what we say is that there's 5 parts to that experience. One is like, know that when you work with Eco Enclosed, we're going to get you the best packaging, i.e. the most sustainable packaging. And underneath that, what that means is like we have looked at like our packaging and what other packaging is available, and we've mapped it on an A through F scale, as I've said. And when you work with us, like you have access to A's. Like that meets our most sort of rigorous standards for circularity. And every now and then, like you might have a need for something that's a C that we sell that's a C, but we're going to tell you, all of its imperfections from a sustainability lens. So that's the best packaging. The second part is that we're going to help match you with the right packaging. We call it, say, the right answers. So either via our website resources or through a conversation with our customer success or our sales team, you are going to tell us, you're going to understand what are your needs, and we're going to help you make sure the packaging you get connected with sort of aligns with those needs. So we have the best packaging, but we also need to bring you the right answers. So we do that matching. The third part is really focus on exceptional delivery. So we want people to feel confident, like, hey, when you order from us, like you're going to get what you ordered on time and it's going to look the way that you looked. And actually, for the last 6 months, we've been tracking this closely, and it's like I think it's 96% of our orders ship on time. 98% of our orders have no what we call no surprises, and so we do have like a strong orientation towards success there. We're not perfect; we are humans; we're imperfect, and so the other part of that is like if there is an issue with your order, like we are people who are going to help you make it right. Like we understand you have a business to run, and so if something goes wrong, we will help you make that right. And then the rest of it is really like our hope is that once you become a customer of ours and we become a partner to you, so that we can help you problem solve. Like if you need, let's say you're doing boxes with us and the shipping label isn't working that well, that you call us and we're going to help you figure out what's the right shipping label for your needs. And then the last part is just like keeping you ahead. So a lot of the EPR conversation that we just talked about, like we're really trying to understand where the industry is going to be a year or two from now, and so that we can help our brand stay ahead of what can oftentimes feel like daunting changes, or like which innovation is right for my brand. Like we can do all that work so the brands don't have to. So that's like packaged, I guess, as the Eco Ally experience. I think most people would never think about it that way, but my hope is that if somebody calls us and engages with us, they will feel that all of the things I just said are true about how we engage with them.
Are there certain quantities that, like if you're a small startup, are there certain quantities that they should expect when they come to you? Like, okay, I need to be selling this amount before I can work with Eco Enclose?
We offer things in like bundle quantities. So for some mailers, that's like as small as 5, and for some mailers, it's as small as 50. So it just depends on the mailer and how it makes sense to bundle them. So we offer almost everything as samples, bundles, and cases. And you typically find that the smallest brands will order things via cases. If you're ordering boxes, like you can order as few as you want. The leap that probably happens is that when brands really want to invest in custom branding, our systems, we have actually like didn't have not invested a lot in digital printing of packaging for a variety of reasons. One is it oftentimes doesn't have the best look and feel, and the second is that it's often done with a toner ink, which does add a layer of recyclability risk that we haven't wanted to embrace. And so because of that, we're sort of a full flexo printing shop, which means in the world of packaging, that means like you order a printing plate, and so there's a little bit more setup to it. So we do have minimums on those that can be as small as 100 to as much as 500, depending on what you're ordering. So once you start custom branding, you might need to be a certain size or need a certain volume in order to make that work. And then the last is what I was calling inline. And so inline, I would say, inline makes a lot of sense if you're shipping like maybe 250 to 1,000 units per week, you can start to really consider inline, and that range varies based on what you're ordering. So a paper mailer gets to inline at a much lower quantity than like a poly mailer, for example.
That's great. It really sounds like you're able to work with such a broad range of folks at different points in their business. And even like, custom branding 100 to 500, that's still like a pretty, that's
Yes,
like
super
still
doable for
a
many
quantity.
brands.
Yeah. So that's fantastic.
Yeah, I hope that's our hope, is that we can sort of sell to whatever brand, whatever size you are, we can meet you where you are. But I always like to be upfront that the service or the type of access to capabilities might be a little different depending on your size.
When somebody signs up with you guys, are you fully, like, you obviously create the packaging? Are you also doing all the inserting, or do you send it to their warehouses?
Yeah. Most of our orders are just getting shipped directly to the brand that ordered it, and
Mhm.
they, or to their fulfillment center. And actually, I would say our brands are largely split. Most of our brands fulfill in house. Most of our small brands fulfill in house. Like, a lot of times you're just doing your business out of your garage, right? And so you're like just getting the packaging and doing it. We also work really closely with a lot of 3PLs. So a lot of brands will ask us to ship the packaging to a 3PL, and we have a lot of relationships with 3PLs directly, because those 3PLs are the ones that are actually like shipping, storing and shipping the brand's products.
Exactly. Oh, perfect. So that actually makes it very easy for a lot of brands, because I know especially the little bit larger brands, they don't want to necessarily have to be
Yeah.
handling, if it can go straight to the fulfillment center and you can work with them and make sure that it all fits with what they need. That's
That's
amazing.
exactly right. And it's really nice to work with the 3PLs because they have a lot of knowledge about like what dimension should it be to have the right, like to minimize damage rates but also maximize shipping price efficiency, and like what are the pros and cons of using 100% recycled poly mailer versus 100% recycled paper mailer. There are different shipping penalties each of them can sort of account for. And so when we work with 3PLs and when brands work with 3PLs, we can sort of collectively identify it and get the right shipping solution for their needs.
You had touched on the future of what you guys want to achieve a little bit, but can you elaborate on that a little bit? Like in your business, in an ideal world, where do you hope that you're headed as far as the sustainability and your products and your lineup and all that stuff?
Yeah. Well, I'd say like very big picture, I think we will say we have won, not like won a competition, but like won our mission when in the hopefully not too distant, but somewhat distant future, like like every time we are selling a package, like an eco enclosed package, that that is having like a net positive or at least net neutral impact on the planet. Like when we get there, we're like, okay, then we know we've won, right? Like then that's exciting. That's the like the gold standard or the North Star that we're working towards. Each year, I always think like, okay, what is a leap that we can make forward in that trajectory? So the seaweed and the algae ink were two big leaps forward. There's like a number of other innovations we're working on. One thing that I'm super excited about is we have a partnership with Crocs and Banana Republic, where they're not only do we have packaging for them, but we also have relationships with them where their retailers ship. If you guys have ever seen like poly bags, they're like the clear plastic bags that almost every single piece of clothing in the world or shoe gets put into.
Mhm.
Those get sent to like all the retailers are now sending those poly bags back to Eco Enclose, and we're working on getting them recycled back into mailers. And so like that's not something happening. That last part isn't happening yet, but that's what we're working towards. And so like if once we have a mailer that's made out of retail poly bags, like that's a huge step in that direction. So I'd say each year it's like what are the big leaps we can make to achieving progress towards that North Star. I think the other part of Eco Enclose that I'm like really passionate about as our team. When we bought it, we were 4 people. We're about 60 people now. And so one of the joys at Eco Enclose is like we have a fairly young, I would say, front of house team, and we have like a really incredible back of house warehouse team. And so just like watching them grow and develop as professionals and in their lives. So I'm also like have sort of hopes and dreams for like how the team evolves and grows and develops professionally.
For those entrepreneurs that are looking to transition to more sustainable packaging, what advice would you offer to them?
Yeah, I would say like don't I first I said it a couple times, maybe progress over perfection. Like don't try to be perfect if that's not going to work for you. Like figure out where you have the most sort of room for improvement. Oftentimes, the most room for improvement is replacing your virgin content with recycled content. And then the other thing I would say is like, don't overstate it to yourself or to your customers what you're doing. So like, I really like don't try to use words like this is sustainable packaging or this is, you know, perfect packaging. You really want to avoid that. Instead, you want to be very like real with your customers of like, hey, this is 70% recycled and it's curbside recyclable. Like use the right, you be very clear because when you're clear with your customers, you're doing right by them, you're being transparent, but you're also giving yourself like a clear understanding of like what's the gap you're trying to fill, right? So if you have 70% recycled packaging today, you know that the goal is to get to 100, you know the gap. So I think like those two things of like start making progress in the direction of maximizing recycled content and post-consumer waste in particular. Make sure you're designing for recyclability and then make sure you're being extremely transparent with yourselves and your customers so that like the opportunity to get better and better is so clear in front of you.
That is fantastic advice. I love it.
Me too. You know, it's actually found even in conversion rate optimizations for the web, anyways, that like using those real numbers, whether it's 70% or 73 or whatever it could be, is more likely to result in a sale than just
Oh,
blanketly
interesting.
stating. Yeah, so even for people I think are catching on to these marketing tactics of just saying blanket, this is 100% eco-friendly or we recycle everything or whatever. People are catching on to the fact that
Yeah.
that's oftentimes not real, but a number that seems a lot more reasonable resonates more with people. So it's very
Yeah,
interesting.
well, that's a good win-win. So it's like not only just good for the environment to do it, but actually it's probably better for the customer experience and their loyalty to you or their connection to you as a brand. So I love that.
Well, is there anything else that we haven't touched on that you would like to share with our audience?
No, I don't think so. I just that we just love, I'd say we love the world of small business and entrepreneurship. So just being in this space is so enjoyable. So for everybody out there, thanks for the work that you're doing to build businesses, build jobs, and build really good sustainable products.
Yeah,
Beautiful.
absolutely. And thank you so much for joining us today on another episode of Entrepreneur Mind Speak. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.
All right, that's it for another episode. We'll see you next time. Bye bye.